Hello everyone, I'm Archie Batra and I'm the Editor-at-Large for the Saint Student newspaper, and I'm very, very grateful to be joined today by Wendy Chamberlain, who's running in the general elections for the Liberal Democrats. So Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everybody, I'm Wendy Chamberlain. I'm the Westminster candidate for the Liberal Democrats for the general election that's happening next week on the 12th of December.
Okay, brilliant. So Wendy, I think a lot of students, and I think a lot of people in North East Fife, are going to decide how they vote this election based on each party's stance on Brexit. Can you just explain the Liberal Democrats' stance on Brexit?
So first of all, I would sort of talk about it in relation to North East Fife. Now, North East Fife in 16 and Scotland obviously as a whole voted firmly to remain, and the intelligence tells us that North East Fife was a particularly strong area for Remain, and I think interestingly for ourselves, in between the two parties that can realistically win this seat, both of the parties are standing on a pro-EU position. So in some respects it's potentially maybe not the dividing factor as it might be for other seats in Scotland. But I think the Liberal Democrats, it can be quite difficult for a smaller party sometimes, which we are in UK politics, to get its message across. But I think we have been very clearly displaying our pro-EU credentials from before the EU referendum and afterwards. So our current position is that we believe there's no better deal than the one we have now, and that we would, if we were in a position where we had a majority as a Liberal Democrat government, we would look to stop Brexit. And we've had obviously a lot of discussion around that revoke policy, and how I certainly think about it is, if the Liberal Democrats as a party went from 12 seats, which is what they obviously won in 2017, to a majority position, that would be a huge change. And realistically, would we expect Prime Minister Jo Swinson, whose position is to stop Brexit, to go to Brussels to negotiate a deal she doesn't believe in, to bring it back, to campaign against it in a subsequent referendum? You're almost in the positions of Jeremy Corbyn and Labour then. So the easiest way to stop Brexit would be to revoke Article 50, and we know that we can do that very straightforwardly.
So it is a vote for you, a vote to stop Brexit and to revoke Article 50?
It's certainly a vote to stop Brexit. It's a vote to continue to display our pro-EU credentials. In terms of revoke, it is only in the circumstances where we held a majority. So otherwise, if that wasn't the case, our position would be that we would continue to campaign for a people's vote, which is something that we've done for some time, and we brought motions forward in the House of Commons for that purpose several times, which weren't supported by Labour, who have now moved to a people's vote position.
Okay, brilliant. So just in terms of my research in terms of the Liberal Democrats' position, Professor Chris Hanratty in Royal Holloway in London estimated the 2019 European election results by constituency, and actually this year the Brexit party was the largest party in North East Fife. So how do you reconcile your position with what a lot of people are clearly feeling in the constituency?
Well, I think that's an interesting analysis. What I would say is that here in Fife, the constituencies were not counted separately at the count at the EU elections. We were counted on a Fife Council basis. The votes were counted face down. So although I think that analysis is interesting, I think it's very difficult to extrapolate what that was like. What I would say is across Fife, the actual results across Fife were the SNP were first, we were second, and the Brexit Party were in third place. So, I am obviously speaking to people on the doorsteps who have a different position to the Liberal Democrats on Brexit, but that doesn't mean, and as I've said, given that the fact that the two main parties who can win the seat here are pro-EU, there are potentially other factors that are influencing how people cast their vote.
Okay, brilliant. And just to move on to another hot button issue this election, I think a lot of people are worried about the future of the National Health Service, and I think a lot of the discussion revolves around whether or not it will be safe in the hands of whoever comes into government. What would the Liberal Democrats do to secure the future of the National Health Service and protect it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this all comes about from the potential of a US trade deal, where Donald Trump, last time he was in the UK, said that potentially everything would be on the table, including the NHS. Although yesterday he was obviously in a position where he was denying that. And again, it was a question that was brought up at the hustings on Monday night as well. And I think a big part of it comes down to the loss of trust and integrity within our political dialogue at the moment, that people, although the government are saying that the NHS is not on the table, their track record means that people maybe don't feel that degree of confidence. So what I would say from the Liberal Democrat perspective, and some of this is obviously a bit tricky because it's a devolved issue in Scotland. So when we're talking about the NHS being on the table, in some ways that's more looking at the English NHS, and the government here in Scotland have been very clear about their position, is that we believe that, again, that we won't be in a position where we need to negotiate potentially disadvantageous trade deals as a smaller country out with the EU, because we want to remain in the EU, and that's the best way to keep our NHS safe. The other thing that I would say in relation to is Labour's position is that they want to nationalise everything and do a top-down reorganisation of the NHS, and we just don't believe that that is the best and most effective way to deliver the kind of services that people need.
Sure. But just in terms of, as you mentioned, the trade deal with the United States, you have the Prime Minister here saying it's not up for sale. You have the President of the United States saying we're not interested in it. Mm-hmm. Do you not trust them when they say that?
Well, I think you just need to look at their track records. I mean, the Washington Post kind of, does it not run a sort of weekly or monthly lies of Donald Trump? And, it does feel that people say whatever they think will be most advantageous at the time. So I think the bottom up, it's maybe less about what my opinion of their trust is, but it's absolutely about what voters' opinions of trust is. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are in the situation that we're in, that we're looking at a general election at the end of the year, our third within 5 years. And, there is a degree of apathy towards politicians and the political discourse generally.
Okay. And how would the Liberal Democrats, I know you said it's a devolved issue, but maybe talking about the party nationally, how would they ensure that the NHS has enough funding in years to come?
Well, I think, that's one of the interesting things around where our manifesto has been judged by the IFS and the Resolution Foundation as being the one that is most credible, is most fiscally prudent, and also is focused on delivering the best services to the poorest in society. So I think I would encourage those watching to take a look, and, we often vote for parties, but vote for policies, and I think you'll find that the Liberal Democrats come out very well.
So I think one of the policies that the manifesto lays out is a rise in income tax to pay for the NHS.
Yes.
Is that a hard sell, do you think, or do you think the people of this country are ready for, paying a little bit more to get a little bit more back?
I think there's no doubt that the period that we've been in since the crisis in 2008 means that people have seen a real-term loss of services, and potentially have seen a loss of money in their pocket as well. And I think there is a recognition, I'm certainly having those conversations, that we only get good public services if they're well funded, and there's lots of debate about how you best fund that. But I think, again, in terms of a clear-cut message, and this is obviously for elsewhere in the UK, that we would look to add a penny on income tax, and people would know that was exactly where that money was going.
Okay. And would you not also deem it prudent to consider at least increasing corporation tax, given that the Labour Party have embraced it and they say it's fully funded and a great way to put more money into the NHS, which it desperately needs?
Well, we have obviously said that we want to maintain the rate of corporation tax as it is and not implement the further cuts that the government were going to do, though they're now stepping back on that as well. I think it is around looking across all of our tax bases and understanding what the best way is to deliver the services that people need. But it's quite clear that across a number of areas, education, health, etc., and those obviously have Barnett consequentials for Scotland, that we need to look at the funding in more depth, because services can't take any more of the cuts that they've experienced to date.
And why do you think that the Liberal Democrat manifesto didn't pledge any increases in corporation tax?
Because I think they've looked across the piece and proposed a number of changes that will deliver the same outcome as the Labour Party are doing. And I would refer back to the IFS and the Resolution Foundation, who are actually critiquing the Liberal Democrat manifesto the best. And again, they've come out with analysis this morning where they say that the SNP manifesto would mean increased austerity. So I find that quite interesting.
Okay. And I think another huge issue that will affect how people vote in this election is each party's response to the environment and changes in the Earth's climate. What will the Liberal Democrats do to help alleviate the climate emergency?
So I think where the Liberal Democrats are is we have got to a place where, and I was in Bournemouth in September for our conference where our climate emergency policy was debated and passed, and I think we are, particularly when you compare to someone like the Conservatives, we are proposing radical change. The Greenpeace obviously assessed all the manifestos, and the Liberal Democrats, absolutely there's always more to do, but I think we've come out in a good place. So I think we've got some really strong policies around insulating every home, and I think what's good about that is the fact that it then not only helps the environment, but it also helps people when we go back to funding, cuts to services and money in people's pockets. By insulating people's homes, not only do we make them more environmentally friendly, we make it cheaper for them to heat and we make it warmer for them as well. We're proposing that we move to all electric vehicles by 2030. Ambitious, but we absolutely believe it can be done. We're also looking at, we've also proposed where we go to reach the 2050 target. We want to make it 2045. We want to really ensure that we decarbonise our financial services, and I think where we scored very strongly in relation to the Greenpeace manifesto was around some of the structures we want to put in place to ensure that companies are operating in an environmentally forward-thinking and ethical way.
Okay, so a lot of students recently have been going on strikes, on marches to protest either government or university inaction on climate change, and a lot of them would be calling for mobilisation on the scale of World War II in order to solve the climate emergency. Don't you agree that the Liberal Democrats fall short of that in what they promise? What I would say is that we are certainly a party who have moved from listening to acting. And that we have made some ambitious proposals. I think give us the opportunity to implement those, work with other parties potentially to implement those, and move forward quite quickly. My youngest son is 12. The UN has said that we have 11 years to save the planet. That's already he's already older than that time. It's clear that we need to make radical change quickly, but we also know that that's not easy. Okay. So would you seek to achieve changes in environmental policy gradually?
I think it depends obviously on the situation we're in after Thursday, but I think when you look across the parties, I think Labour, SNP, Greens, who are obviously not standing in this seat, and ourselves are really in a position where we want to move forward quickly, and we'll put all pressure on the other parties to do so. And I think it absolutely is something. And I think it's sad, we would like this to be the climate election. I think your first question suggests that it's potentially not the primary focus, and it should be, but that we want to take action quickly, and it's something that should be done on a cross-party basis so that we can make those changes.
So would you seek to cooperate with other parties in Westminster in order to bring about the changes to environmental policy that you would want?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think as a smaller party, that's something that we've always done, as in some ways we have to punch above our weight to deliver some of our key policies with the support of other individuals. And I think, again, going back to the sort of comments around political discourse and trust, etc., is in some ways that's what people want us to do. They want us to move beyond the politicking in some respects and deliver the change that is required urgently in this case.
Okay, so just talking about trust in politics, is there not a sort of tainted brand of the Liberal Democrats, at least among students, following the 2010 promise to not raise tuition fees, or in fact to abolish them, and then they ended up being trebled to £9,000? What would you say to students who maybe are unsure about voting for the Liberal Democrats on that basis of, I'm not sure I can trust them?
So I think it's interesting. I joined the Liberal Democrats in 2015. I wasn't a member prior to then. And probably, so I was in the police till 2011, so there was an opportunity for me to join after I'd left the police and I didn't. And I wonder, in hindsight, whether the coalition was part of that. I do believe there's an aspect of the Liberal Democrats almost we seem to be owning a lot of more of what happened in the coalition than potentially the larger party, the Conservatives, were. But I think there's no doubt that if you make, and this is what I would say if I were to be elected, if you make a pledge and you then go back on that pledge, you have to expect there to be criticism of that. And I think that was absolutely something that we did. I think I worked in further education for a year, and although and I'm proud of the fact that the Labour Liberal Democrat administration here in Scotland were the first to actually stop tuition fees here in Scotland, but I think that we need to look across the whole skills network around so further education, the number of cuts in courses, student numbers and amalgamations, I think has had a negative impact on that. It needs to be balanced with the university and higher education needs and requirements. And I think it's a difficult subject. We want to have as highly skilled a population as we have, so that we can potentially make the innovative changes that need and required in climate change. But we also know that people with graduate educations over the longer term go on to earn more. So how do we ensure that there is a contribution? And I think the other thing, and this is potentially true in relation to poorer students, is that the cuts by the Scottish Government to bursaries and grants has potentially, despite no tuition fees, made it more difficult for some of those people to go into higher education or indeed stay in it.
Okay, so and what would you say to the St Andrews student who perhaps doesn't trust the brand of the Liberal Democrats this election?
I think I would echo Jo Swinson's comments of that we went into coalition for good reason. At that time, the global financial crisis was front and centre and had to be dealt with. I think we delivered a number of good things within the coalition around pupil premiums, raising the threshold for income tax that took a number of people out of tax. But I think we also have to accept that there were decisions made or decisions supported or Conservative policy supported that we got wrong, and we have apologised for. So we have listened, we have learned, and we hope that we can regain people's trust and support.
Would you be willing to re-enter a coalition after this election?
Well, we've been quite clear, and I've always said jokingly that I don't want to say clear as a politician. We've been quite clear that we have no interest in a coalition as the outcome of this election. But I've also just said that we're willing to work cross-party where we can deliver some of our key policies that we believe are absolutely essential.
So cooperation, not coalition, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say in relation to Brexit, going back to our first topic, is that we have absolutely demonstrated that. Stephen Gethins, as the SNP MP for this area, has worked with Liberal Democrat MPs in the House of Commons in relation to the Ben Act and other areas. And I would certainly see myself, if successful, doing likewise to deliver what we believe is in the best interest of the people of North East Fife.
Okay, and then just finally, this is the most marginal seat in the country, and I think a lot of people would actually expect the SNP to lose this seat. Do you think that's indicative of Scotland turning against independence and nationalism as a wider trend? Well,
I think there's no doubt that 2 votes. That's all there was. But when you look at the most recent sort of last couple of sets of polling figures, what that showed was an increase in support for the SNP and the Liberal Democrats, a fall for Labour and the Conservatives. I think Conservatives are rallying somewhat now that we're in the general election campaign. So I wouldn't feel that I could suggest that what's happening or what potentially could happen in North East Fife is an overall indictment of a view on independence or the SNP across Scotland. What I would say is, and as you pointed out, is that North East Fife voted to remain in the UK and remain in the EU, and in the conversations I'm having, I haven't detected a perceptible change to that overall opinion. And as a result of being the only party that's pro-UK and pro-EU in this election, hopefully we will benefit from that.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Wendy Chamberlain, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Archie.